I do believe that this marks, without exception, the single most consequential election for governor that our state has ever seen in our history. There has never been a greater contrast between two candidates. Perhaps the most important contrast between myself and my opponent, Amy Acton, is our vision and our attitude towards success. I believe that success is something that we ought to celebrate as a people, something that we ought to celebrate as a state. Our educational success, your family's economic success, your individual success, America's civic success. I believe in celebrating success. And the person I'm running against in this race believes in villainizing success. She will remind you every day that I'm a billionaire, and I will remind you that I was not born a billionaire, I was not born a millionaire, I was not born in anything heir, I was born an heir to nothing, okay? But my story is possible in this great country and in our great state because we embrace free enterprise, because we embrace liberty, because we embrace the idea of exceptionalism and the pursuit of excellence. That is who we are. And Thomas Jefferson famously said, he signed the Declaration of Independence 250 years ago. Shortly after, he said, the government you elect is the government you deserve. It's almost as though he was talking about 2026, our year right here in this election for governor of Ohio. We can wake up to one of two Ohios later this year. We can wake up to an Ohio where we're bringing down your electric bills because we're producing more energy in Ohio. We can wake up to an Ohio where your property taxes are coming down because it's your land and not the government's. We can wake up to an Ohio where we are on a path to putting our state on our way to a zero income tax state because it is your money, not the government's. And frankly, we can compete with states like Texas and Florida and Tennessee. We can wake up to an Ohio where our children are doing better in math and reading and writing, being taught how to actually perform well in our schools rather than indoctrinated with victimhood psychology. One where housing prices are going down because we're cutting the red tape to build more homes in our state, to make that American dream and home ownership more affordable to the next generation. And we can wake up to an Ohio where we are more united because it is easier to connect with our fellow neighbors and to be united in a rising economic tide. That is one Ohio where we can wake up to in November, and that is where I will lead this state if you elect me this November. The other, I'll take applause for that. Thank you. That's where we're headed. But there's a different version of how this could go if my opponent comes anywhere near the levers of power. Could be in Ohio where businesses are once again fleeing our state in droves, where you see a $21 billion plus income tax hike coming to you directly in 2027. One where our property taxes continue to go up. One where our public schools remain beholden to the bureaucracy that is choking the success of our students, and one where we celebrate victimhood instead of success. That's what the other Ohio looks like. I'm proudly the most pro-free enterprise, pro-liberty, conservative, and pro-capitalist governor this state will have ever seen, running against, unfortunately, what would be the first socialist governor that we have ever seen. And I want to say a word about the contrast here, because this is really important. The traditional Republican criticism of Amy Acton, and I'm sympathetic to this, is that she advanced and advocated for the lockdowns, which have not aged well. Lockdowns of our public schools, where kids in Cincinnati public schools were shut out of their schools for 2 years, while my alma mater of St. X was closed for 5 days. Those kids in those public schools will never get those 2 years of their education back. That's unforgivable. One where businesses were shuttered, and we actually chased businesses and entrepreneurs to states like Florida or Texas, where they could thrive rather than in Ohio. That's the traditional Republican critique of Amy Acton, and I agree with it, because those were poor policy choices for her to advance and to advocate for. But I think the deeper criticism, and I think it's really important to understand, is it's not going to be a pandemic the next time around. It's going to be different, tough decisions that we need to make as a state. We don't know what those are going to be. It's part of electing a leader is you're not electing just a slate of policies. You're electing somebody who we believe as a people is actually fit to lead our state. And what disappoints me about Amy Acton, somebody who I will tell you, I was rooting for her success as an Ohioan and as an American. She was a Democrat. But Rob, you said it that the day you accepted this nomination to be lieutenant governor, that you voted for her confirmation. You were rooting for her success. I was rooting for her success. I think I speak for everyone in this room. We were all rooting for the success of anyone who leads our state in a tough time. But what disappoints me is somebody who could not draw the distinction between older Ohioans who might have been at risk of death from COVID-19 versus younger second and third and fourth grade students who were not at risk of death from COVID-19, but who were shut out and are at risk of depression, anxiety, and learning loss as a consequence of those decisions. Someone who had no patience to distinguish between actually those who were naturally immune, who had been exposed to the virus and could be let back out from lockdowns versus somebody who had not. And the gall the temerity to wear a white coat and signify to the public for hours on end that you were a scientific authority without actually drawing those basic distinctions that were actually guided by science reflects an utter laziness and abandonment of responsibility that our public deserves in our leaders. And when Rob and the other legislators told her that we had to take a more nuanced, science-driven approach, you want to know what she did? She quit. To me, that is the most damning indictment of somebody who wants to lead this state. I will never quit on Ohio.
What makes this speech politically significant is that Vivek Ramaswamy is trying to do something much bigger than just criticize pandemic lockdowns. He's attempting to rewrite the political identity of Ohio itself. This wasn't simply a policy argument. It was a culture war speech, wrapped inside an economic message, wrapped inside a leadership test. And understanding that matters, because this is increasingly how modern Republican campaigns operate. Every issue becomes part of a broader ideological story about identity, power, and what kind of country America should become. Right from the beginning, Ramaswamy frames the election as existential. Not important, not competitive, existential. He says it's the most consequential governor's race in Ohio history. That kind of language is intentional because it raises emotional stakes immediately. It tells voters this isn't just about taxes or schools, it's about the future direction of society itself. Then he introduces the central contrast he wants voters to believe: success versus victimhood. That's one of the defining rhetorical strategies of modern conservative politics. Democrats are often portrayed by Republican candidates as people who punish achievement, resent wealth, and encourage grievance politics, while Republicans cast themselves as defenders of ambition, entrepreneurship, and personal responsibility. But there's something important missing from Ramaswamy's framing, and this is where democratic analysis matters.